Well, welcome everyone to Drive To Win. I'm Justin Bell, your host, and I'm here live from the Wynn in Las Vegas. It's actually a week off in the world of motorsport. Well, a week off in the world of Formula One. Obviously, after the Canadian race last 2 weeks ago, they are getting ready for Austria this coming weekend. But a week off means that for the teams, they get busy with all the upgrades and all the evolution development of the cars. But for the drivers, according to their social media, it looks like they just go and have a really good time. All that money, they're so young. That's exactly what I'd be doing. Well, we have a great guest on today's show. He is one of my oldest mates. We raced together as teammates in Vauxhall Lotus at the end of the 80s. David Brabham, son of three-time world champion Australian Formula One driver Jack Brabham. David will be joining us. He raced in Formula One. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment. Anyway, a very cool guy with an eye on what goes on in world motorsport. So I'm very pleased to have him here. Now, obviously, with a week off, attention goes to other kind of gossip in the world of motorsport. And that is really where the Wynn is factoring in. As you know, we are going to be gearing up for the Heineken Silver Grand Prix of Las Vegas in November. Well, the weekend before that is the Concours at the Wynn, which is very much establishing itself as one of the must-do car concours on the international calendar. And what makes it that is really a unique blend of the hospitality that the Wynn can bring to an event that is traditionally quite staid and traditional, but their spin on it is bringing in some of the most iconic cars from history, the movie cars that made stars famous. They have some of the latest offerings from the electric field, and of course, also the world of supercars, hypercars, bringing in some of the, not just the cars, but also some of the owners who span every type of person you can imagine, but the common denominator, they have millions to spend on these mouth-watering works of performance art. And it'll all be here out there on the fairway right behind me at the Wynn here in Las Vegas. And if you want to check it out and try and be a part of it, then just go to it's www.lasvegasconcourse.com and check it out. They got some great information starting to tell you about the kind of cars they'll have and all that. So with Wynn being my primary sponsor here on Drive to Win, it really is all about gearing up for that. And right now, talking about what's coming up in the world of Formula One. Now, being a Formula One weekend off, as I said, the gossip raises its head. And one of the big things is the intersection of Hollywood and motorsport. Now, there's always been a long-term fascination with Hollywood with motor racing. We had Steve McQueen with the movie Le Mans back in the early 70s. We had Rush, the James Hunt, Niki Lauda saga, bringing the human interest, probably for the first time, to the world of entertainment and the big screen. But then you had Ford versus Ferrari with Le Mans set in the early mid-60s. And that really did bring a focus on the dynamics, the danger, the investment, the human sacrifice that it takes to be at the top. And of course, with Drive to Survive, it brought the human interest story to Formula One for so many of you. So many of my friends now really get Formula One because of the Netflix documentary series. So much going on, which is why the news that Ryan Reynolds and a group, investor-based group here in the States, have put in €200 million, just over €200 million into a 24% stake in the team, which is quite remarkable. Why would they do that? Well, obviously, when it looks at what you can bring with a partner to a Formula One team, you have to be pretty specific about it. Part of that, of course, is bringing a global interest in sports and attracting these major investors and bringing something special to it. When you look at it, Redbird's portfolio includes Liverpool Football Club. They also own the third largest stake in the Boston Red Sox with the whole Fenway thing. They also have a stake in AC Milan and Toulouse. And as the Alpine CEO Laurent Rossi said, it brings in a huge amount of cash, but it allows them really to also rely on some of the expertise and the knowledge from the Redbird portfolio to expand on things like merchandise, It expands on licensing deals and really is a huge boost for the team. I would love to talk to Ryan Reynolds and those guys about why they do it, but it brings a profile to the sport. And they did that documentary series on Wrexham Football Club, which Ryan was so involved with, and that blew that up and took it from, a pretty lowly field in the English soccer rankings to something a bit more special. So, who knows? We'll see what happens on there. Give it context. Back in 2002, John Henry bought the Red Sox for $700 million, which now looks like a bargain, right? With it valued over $4.5 billion. At the same time, Alpine has just been valued at $900 million, which is remarkable because Formula One was never really treated as with the franchise framework in mind, which of course is why so many people want to get involved. We talked to Mario Andretti the other day about on the show on Drive to Win about them trying to bring the Cadillac back Andretti Formula One team to the field in 26. Well, a new team to Formula One anyway, British racing team Hi-Tech has just announced that they are going to put in a formal bid to be on the grid in 26. And they have a new investment deal with a Kazaki business billionaire. And they've put in, it doesn't say, but an awful lot of money. And that team, it is a Silverstone-based team, super successful in Formula 4, Formula 3, Formula 2. They know what they're doing. They have that infrastructure based in England around Formula 1 that they know what it would take to get to the grid. But of course, with investors like this billionaire coming in, made his money in copper mining as one of his things, it can only be good for the sport. But it means with a max, I think, of 24 cars on the grid, that's 12 teams the way they have it right now. As you know, there's been some opposition, and we talked about it on the show, opposition to bringing in new teams because it means they have to split the pot. My opinion is it's probably a good thing. Rising tides lifts all boats. And I'm sure we would have the opportunity to, if you could imagine, have 24 teams on the grid in 26, it would be a fantastic thing. I guess the summary of all this is these guys are big businessmen getting involved in our sport, which means the long-term forecast, and I can only imagine they know a lot more about the economics of motorsport and Formula One and where Liberty Media are taking the sport that they know. And if they're investing, it's got to be a long-term play, which is good for you, good for me, and certainly lines things up well here for the Las Vegas Grand Prix at the end of the year. My guest, David Brabham. He, as I said, we were teammates back at the end of the 80s. When he arrived, he was the new kid on the block. We did well together. He went on to win the Formula 3 championship. He then got into Formula One in 1990 and then 1994 with Brabham, and then Simtech, a little bit of a roller coaster career there. But boy, David was fast. He had the right attitude. Many times I wish if we could have had a little bit from each other, maybe we would have both had a better career. But he went on to be one of the top sports car racers in the world. He won 23 IMSA races, or they were called something else at the time, 23 big major international wins, and has won Le Mans. Actually, he won in class, and then he won overall with Peugeot. So David, one of the best drivers, a guy that has been working very hard on keeping the Brabham family name out there and certainly doing a good job at that. And see, my godson, Sam, is also racing in Australia to great success. The Brabham name is here very much to stay. David, DB, so nice to have you on the show, mate.
Hey, JB, how you going, mate? It's, thanks very much for having me on board.
Good. Sorry to keep you up so late, but it's going to be worth it. So listen, you and I go back a long time. We only see each other. We saw each other at Le Mans just a couple of weeks ago, which was lovely. But tell everyone what you're up to right now, because I kicked off introducing you by saying you're keeping the Brabham name alive, and so is Sam out there, obviously racing in Australia. But what are you up to right now?
Yeah, obviously, I raced for quite a long time and got to the point where I thought I'm going to be too old and too slow for anybody to want me to drive. So it was like, what the hell am I going to do in the future? So, the Brabham name has been around since 1948. And, my father, obviously 3 times world champion. And the Formula One history, is right up there with some of the greats. So it was about taking an iconic racing name and taking it forward, mainly as a brand, and getting it out there and getting some activations which were relevant to today, because obviously us kids went racing, and Sam and Matthew obviously racing in America. Sam in Australia keeps all that going, but needed something a little bit more significant. So in Australia, we have Brabham Automotive as one of our partners down there out of Adelaide, and we build the Brabham BT62, the ultimate track car. 700 horsepower, under a ton in weight. 1,200 kilos of downforce. So it breaks lap records everywhere it goes. So that evolved into a race version of that, as well as a road version. And then we come up with the BT63, which is the GT2 car, which raced last year in Europe. So that's a really cool, exciting project, and it's one that's going to grow into the future and take the Brabham name forward.
I love it. And I know how hard you're working. And talking about hard work, you reached Formula One very quickly. Right, we raced together. You did Formula 3, and I couldn't even see you for dust as you headed off into the Formula 1 territory. What do you think now? You've got your son and your nephew doing it, and I know you're involved with other young drivers. How hard is it? Give the viewers context how hard it is to make the grid as a young Formula 1 driver, because we tend to in the States base things off football, baseball, basketball, you play college, you get there. That does not exist in racing, right? So put in context the journey that it takes to make a Formula for Lando or any of one of those guys.
Yeah, it's very simple. It's money.
Yeah.
Money and opportunity. I mean, obviously, when we were racing, there was the opportunities for a driver to get down the road in his career and possibly get to Formula One like I did. There was a lot more opportunities. The sponsors were around. When I was doing Formula 3 here live on BBC, which is the biggest channel here in England, and there was loads of blue chip companies in there. And there was money. There you could get free drives and move along, and that's what happened with me in British Formula 3 after you and I were together in Vauxhall Lotus with Camel cigarettes as the main sponsor there, which pretty much got me over to Europe. And then I won the British F3 Championship and the Formula 3 World Cup. Signed to do F3000, and the F3000 team bought the Brabham team, and next thing I know, I was a Brabham Formula 1 driver, and it happened probably 3 years earlier than I thought it would. But in today's world, that the escalating costs, and I say the competition in terms of getting the commercial dollar is a lot more competitive in all different sports and areas that where content is kind of king, and it's taking people off in different directions. They weren't there around when I was racing back in those days, like we were. So it really becomes down to money, and you'll see most of the people on the grid are paying for their drives, and it is very much a money market. It's as simple as that.
Crazy. In tandem with that, though, mate, the ladder system of karting. And yes, the money it requires to get them there, but the sim driving, the training, the psychiatrists involved in things, arguably you could say that the guys that dovetail the financial backing with the ability are really bloody good drivers when they get there. They're very complete, aren't they? Maybe more so. You'd never driven on any of the tracks in Formula One. The first time you saw it was walking or running around the track. Now they do thousands of miles of sim racing. Am I right in thinking they're more evolved by the time they get the opportunity?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that. Yes. I mean, obviously when we were doing it, we didn't have simulators. They even didn't even have data when I did our Formula 3. It was just an old tacho rev counter that kind of went like that, and you'd come off the corner, you see what RPM you had. You got to thought, right, well, okay, I went through the corner a bit quicker, and it was very much seat of the pants stuff. So in today's world, the driver is a very different driver to when we were doing it. They are so much more prepared to be a racing driver. There's so much more technology, so much more science about getting the best out of the driver. It's pretty insane the way that's evolved. So when people do get that opportunity, even if they've got money and maybe not as much talent, they're going to do a better job than perhaps they would have done when they were racing in our day.
Interesting, right? What was to give it context again, when you were in either the Brabham or the SimTech, what was the cool thing you had going on that now we'd almost laugh about in terms of technology, right? I mean, now with how advanced these cars are, what was the hot button when you were doing it, technology-wise?
Well, obviously, when I went to Formula One from F3, all of a sudden there was some data. At least you could start looking at some of the data, nowhere near like it is today, but you had some data to look at, which was very useful. When I was with SimTech, we were still, at Brabham, we still had the H-pattern gearbox.
Unbelievable.
There was no sequential gearbox or paddle shift. And then when I went to SimTech in '94, a lot of the teams were having semi-automatic anyway, but SimTech at that time was a new team, didn't have a great deal of money, so technology was pretty limited. And we had a sequential gearbox, and I remember, actually it was at Imola, we tried for the first time having a paddle on the back of the steering wheel where we put a pressure preload on the gear stick, and then when you flicked the button, it made the engine cut, which gave you a quick gear change with your foot flat on the throttle. Wow. And when that didn't work, I lost a second a lap. So that was what we were kind of up against in terms of the other competitors. But that was our big ticket that time. So we had a little button to cut the engine.
I mean, that's wild compared to now. I've got to ask you, as someone that's driven a Formula One car, I drove one in a commercial in Dubai, so I'm not qualified to say this. But, GT cars have evolved to be a lot easier to drive as well, with the air conditioning and but they've always a lot of steering input in a GT car, as you know. When I watch the Formula One drive, the modern driver, the amount of time they must spend in the sim to be able to make those adjustments. I was lucky if I could pull off a brake balance change, you know what I mean? And get my hands back on the wheel. Admittedly, I was shifting with a gearbox, right? But so many adjustments, so many tiers of adjustments. And I can't wait to talk to a Formula One engineer about this. But they seem to have going so fast, yet they have so much time because they're so heavily processed and familiar. But their pressure on the wheel seems to be so light, right? You're watching Lewis's or Max's hands, and he's not gripping. He's holding it between his fingertips. Yet they're the fastest cars in the world.
Yeah, I mean that's for me shows the development of the vehicles as they've gone on. Because, like in my day, we had one button. You just talk to the radio, and it wasn't that complicated. No power steering. And you had a lot of caster. So the steering was actually quite heavy, particularly on full tanks. So I remember the first time at Monaco with full tanks in the race, and you could just hardly turn the steering wheel. It was just really, and of course there was so much kickback from the suspension as well. So now when you're watching them, they're literally on a Sunday cruise. They're not, but the geometry and the way those Formula One cars are set up suspension wise, from a suspension geometry and a steering geometry and everything, they try and make the cockpit environment as easy as they can for the driver, and they have to, because they are very physical cars to drive. And you're right in terms of so many buttons. I mean, you wouldn't just rock up into a Formula One car without any sort of simulator training to go through all the switches while you're driving, so you understood. You didn't have to think about it. You just knew exactly what button everything was. So, I mean, today is a very complicated Formula One car to drive for a driver. But as you say, the processes they go through is pretty intense, and they need to know their stuff. They need to know what button they can press or dial that they can move to improve the performance of what they're doing, or perhaps maybe save the engine a little bit. They need to know exactly what to do.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm loving talking to you about it, because what's happening here in the States is, Drive to Survive gave everyone a huge audience, insight into behind the scenes, Gunter Steiner swearing. Yeah. It's insane. It just opened it up. And for me too, right? I mean, I'm going, wow, yeah, that was happening. This is happening. What I think one of the purposes of all these podcasts and talking to people like yourself is trying to also bring a sense of the reality and perspective on what it's like to drive these things, because they look so easy. And why is Max so much better at the moment? And I will ask you that question with the perspective also of, you were a very cerebral driver. You had a lot more intelligence behind the wheel than I did. And, I think I should have been in the 60s. I'd have been super happy, just, chasing birds, having a cigarette and going fast. I think that would have been me, right? You know that.
That was you, mate.
It was me. Yeah, maybe that was the problem. Not the smoking part, but the birds and the fast part. But how do you think, first of all, how do you think you'd do in today's cars?
Oh, good question. It's hard to say, isn't it? I mean, we, like I said, when I did Formula 3, I mean, it was all very basic, and I was racing against Schumacher and Hakkinen, Mika Salo, Alex Zanardi, all those guys that ended up. Yeah, I mean, when you look at that grid, it was pretty astounding grid, to be fair. And when I won Macau, won the World Cup, that's kind of what launched my career. But how I would go now, I mean, obviously, I'd probably go around in 5 mile an hour and scare the hell out of myself. But back then, you had the confidence that whatever car you got in, you'd be fast. So I guess you'd have that mentality going into one of these vehicles, as long as you've been trained to do so. So as a driver, you think, just throw me the keys and I'll drive it.
And before we get on to the current drivers, like Max, is that why? Because I've been asked by fans of the sport, new fans. So why would they put a Mick Schumacher on the sidelines and then talk about bringing him back? Why would they put a Ricciardo? His career's over. If it was other sports, he'd be gone. But now they're talking about him coming back. Is that, DB, because the level of investment in a driver to technologically be aware of the systems is so vast that you need to have, any experience in it puts you ahead of everybody else? You know what I'm saying? They know the systems, which is worth time, right?
Well, they do. I mean, they all know that at the end of the day, it's all about performing. Yeah, it's about the stopwatch. If you're not on it, you're in the public view, the world public view. But the pressure financially for the teams to get points is really intense, as you can see on Drive to Survive. The pressure is pretty high, and everyone reacts in a certain way. And when the car's not great, it's hard for the team to make progress. Particularly, I think, with the cost cap now. In the old days, you could just go testing if you had the budget and fix your problem. Now the gaps between the cars haven't really closed up a lot, and of course the cost cap sort of stifles some of that development as well. So having the most intelligent of people in your organization in Formula One is even more critical. I'd hate to see what the salaries are for some of those guys, because the top teams will be paying big bucks for the best minds to be there, so that they can shortcut any development that they may need that they can't afford because of the cost cap.
That's very insightful. You're right. They're worth as much, because the driver can't get faster half the time because they don't get the time. So they have to do it in the lab, so to speak. So
it's not just the driver that has to perform, it's everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody has to perform. And if they don't, the competition in Formula One is, it's pretty high, isn't it? So some one individual not pulling their weight is going to be seen pretty quick, and you're either going to be in or you're out. And we saw that with, some of the drivers you've spoken about, with Mick Schumacher and Daniel Ricciardo, who weren't really performing to the level out, And yes, they could possibly get back in. We'll have to wait and see. Don't know where Daniel might end up, but I'm not sure he'll ever go back to Red Bull. I don't think that's ever going to be an option for him. But where does he go? Who knows?
Who knows? What do you think about inter-team dynamics? Because we've all had teammates in sports cars. They're sitting alongside you effectively. You get out, he gets in. It's a very symbiotic relationship. You sort of marry your differences somewhere in the middle. He's tall, you're short. You like a loose car, they like a pushing car. You work it out, right? But to get the best net effect. But in Formula One, your teammate, that side of the garage, is your teammate, but also your career depends on you beating him. It does, doesn't it? It's, as you said, stopwatch.
Absolutely.
Two very different scenarios, which is obviously Perez, and then with Aston Martin, with Stroll. Stroll has a very different dynamic in the fact that his dad owns the team, but the heat must be starting to be applied under the seat, wouldn't you say? Because the investments are so large. I think he's done bloody well. Some of the overtaking he did, like on Lewis the other day, I'm going, man, he won everything he could on the way up, right? He did very well in karting. It just shows at this level how good the rest are. The best of the best are that good. And then you have Sergio. Then you have Sergio Perez, who's basically mentally not as strong as Max, but his side of the garage know that he has the same equipment. Talk about what that pressure must be like for a driver, because when you go home and you get into bed at night and you have dinner and you're with your friends, you know that it's about going fast. And as you said, it's $1 billion enterprise. So what are your thoughts on those two situations?
Well, I did live that actually. When I went to Formula One, Stefano Modena, who was quite an experienced driver, he'd been in F1 with Brabham before and done quite well. And then he was my teammate. I'd just come from F3, so I had a massive amount to learn. The politics I'd never really experienced before. Half the team wanted me, half the team didn't. And the only way you could prove your worth was actually getting out there and doing the job. And I never out-qualified him. I got very, very close, but I could never out-qualify him. I only learned later on because we were struggling for money. The team was struggling for money at that time. So I ended up getting his second-hand stuff, which didn't help me. But he was the number one driver. So that was my kind of scenario. But the pressure of performing is there at the back of the grid as well as at the front. I see Perez and Max. I think there's a vast difference in talent between the two. I think everyone loves Sergio, but when it comes to raw talent, Max is a step ahead, way ahead of Perez. And Stroll, it's an interesting dynamic because obviously Daddy owns the team, but at the same time, as you said, he's done performances where you go, hats off, you're a lot better than I think people probably thought you would be. And then. But with the sort of performances you're seeing from Fernando at the moment, and that gulf between the two, really, really is like there for everybody to see. And I'd imagine the pressure for Mr. Stroll there is going to be on two Strolls is going to be pretty heavy to see what they're going to do about it.
Yeah, because to be a serious Formula One team, which they are, have evolved into the contender of the rest, ahead of Ferrari right now. You want those championships.
Yeah, amazing job too. Amazing job what these guys have done from where they were last year to where they are today. It all looks easy from the outside, but what they were able to pull off was a small miracle, really.
Yeah.
And it made everybody else down the pit lane stand up and take notice because they made a lot of changes. They got it done, and they've got a very competitive package.
Yeah. So when you look at Max and you look at the front of the grid, I said last week's show, it's not like Lewis has forgotten how to drive. He's capable of winning races any weekend he can if the car's there. Talk about that confidence as a driver, because you got it in sports cars. Do you remember that era from Penos and then you went to Peugeot? And you knew you should win, given the right equipment, any of the races you entered into. You knew you were as good as anyone in the world. Talk about that mental thing, because he has got it right now, where you go into every race knowing you should win.
Yeah, I think the best way to describe it for me is you either know or you think you've got confidence. There's a big difference about knowing that when you turn up to the racetrack, you're going to win. There's a mindset shift. I always remember, I think it was Ron Dennis made a kind of an odd comment that, if someone thinks they've got confidence, they're not there yet. And I think he was absolutely right, because Max just knows. And you got, Perez who's confident, but he doesn't turn up at a racetrack knowing that he can win. And when you've made that mental shift, people like Lewis, people like Fernando, they just kind of have that. And it's not an easy thing to get into where that stays there for a long time. I had it in sports cars. Yes, I felt when I jumped in the car, I could beat anyone on the day. I just had that beyond confidence. I just knew that I was in the best shape. I had a great team around me. I was highly motivated. I was focused. I'd done all the prep leading up to every race, and I was ready. And I just knew that I could just get the job done. Even if we dropped behind during the race, I still didn't lose belief that I could still win. And it's knowing and that level of belief that these drivers have in Formula One, as well as their talent, makes them slightly untouchable.
Yeah, it really does. Before I let you go, I do want to obviously reflect back, because one of the things that's hard to put across as well to a new generation of Formula One fans is the potential danger of our sport. Because with the halo, with the accidents we see them have, barrel rolling over guardrails, get out, shake it off and go. It wasn't that long ago that was not the world we lived in. And you lived through and were front row seat, unfortunately, to maybe the worst weekend in modern motorsport history, when your teammate Roland Ratzenberger died on the Saturday. And then on the Sunday, Ayrton Senna died. It was, no words can describe what that meant for our sport. I'm sure that being that proximity to danger never left you. You always respected it. Do you think I'm so glad it's so safe now, but we must never forget it is a dangerous, dangerous, dangerous sport. How do you relate the time you were there with what happened to Ayrton, what happened to Roland, to where we are now? What is the fine knife edge that we're on?
Well, I would say the knife edge perhaps is not as sharp as it used to be. Obviously you're referring to Imola in '94, which was a turning point for motorsport. There's no doubt about it. We lost two drivers, one legend of the sport, Ayrton Senna, and a young, not young, but an up and coming, driver getting his break in Formula One, tragically taken away from him. So from that moment, the whole thing changed in terms of safety. You got to take your hats off to Bernie, Max, and Professor Sid Watkins, who all got together and said this has got to change. Obviously Jackie Stewart did it in my dad's day. He was very vocal about all of that. To me, the danger, I never really thought about it. I respected it, but I never felt like I jump in a race car and think about the danger. In some way, it kind of excited me. But I never had many big accidents. I had a few, but I did respect it. And that's why I liked racing in America, because, the tracks in Europe changed so much from 1994 that people, I think, take even more risks because they feel safer in their environment. So if they go off track, they can just drive back on. And if they do have an accident, the tub and the halo and everything is so good in terms of safety. I think people don't perhaps respect the danger as they did back in our day, and that's why you see a lot of accidents, and you go, I was sitting in front of the grandstand, right at the grandstand at the start of the British Grand Prix last year, watching this Alfa Romeo coming towards us and hit the fence right in front of us. And when I was watching the car come, I could see the top of the car, the roll hoop disappear, and the thing collapsed. And that's when I started to panic about the driver, because that's not that you don't want to see that.
No.
And obviously he ended up upside down in the fence right in front of us. But with the sides of the car, in my day you were dead, but the sides being so high now, with the halo, it gave that added protection. So when the roll hoop broke, you had another layer. In our day, if the roll hoop broke, it was our head. Yeah. That was it. So I think that really highlighted the advancement of the safety of the vehicles, and that's not going to stop. They don't sit there and go, well, that's all great. The FIA and Formula One are constantly looking and searching for better ways to make the cars safer for the driver, and also the fans watching as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that little insight there, mate. Austria this weekend, it's going to be a good one.
That's right, mate.
It's going to be a good one. You'll be watching?
Yeah. It'll be. I think it'll be a good one for
one
Max.
team. Yeah, it'll be a really good one for Max.
Basically, the whole of Holland will be there with their smoke. Their orange smoke and orange thing. So it'd be interesting to see. Obviously the upgrades that have been coming along. I think Red Bull still have the advantage for sure, but there's more and more upgrades from teams, which hopefully will start to close those gaps and make the racing a bit more interesting too.
Yeah, I hope so too. And you'll be going to the British Grand Prix, I'm sure, in person?
I will be, yes. I'm actually there, and I'm driving my dad's 1960 Formula One Championship winning car.
Wow.
And that's the Cooper T53 in a parade of all the Grand Prix cars that I think have won over a period of time. So that'll be a great honor. I've never driven that car. I've seen it race in historic racing, and the owner rang up and he said, "Look, do you want to drive it?" So yeah, that's really cool.
Love it.
So I'm really looking forward to
just proving really old drivers will always jump. We jump at the chance to get in a car, regardless, right?
Yeah, I mean we do, but especially when your father won a world championship in that big, in that car, and 59 he won the championship. Won it at Sebring, the first ever American Grand Prix. There's a lot of great history there, and really looking forward to jumping in it.
Perfect, mate. Thanks so much for coming on the show. You can go to bed now,
mate. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care, dude. Bye.
All right, mate. See you later.
Okay, mate. Well, a big thank you to David Brabham, DB, for joining me. As you can tell, old mates with a long road to this point in our life. Anyway, great guy. It is time now for this week's race preview, sponsored by the Wynn Las Vegas, when we get to talk about the Austrian Grand Prix coming up this weekend. Now, as if Red Bull need any more advantage, it is the Red Bull Ring in Austria. The track was built by the Red Bull founder. It is set there in one of the most beautiful backdrops in the world of Formula One. It's the beautiful green hills. The fans come out by, the masses. And as DB said, the Dutch fans will be there setting off their orange smoke grenades, filling the fan zones with their enthusiasm and a lot of orange smoke. Never wanted to sit behind that, by the way. But as if they needed more boost going into this weekend's race. Now, for me, the big question is, we know Max, unless something pretty traumatic happens or a mechanical failure, which again, much to the chagrin of the opposition, never seems to happen, Max will probably win the race. But the big question is, for me, where will Sergio Perez finish? If he finishes 6th or lower again, it is so detrimental to his place in the team. Contract time, it's the politics of the pit lane, it's the way your side of the garage reacts. He should be second this weekend, and he knows it. He has to be second to put himself into position that if Max has a problem, he collects the win. There is no way he can let the team down by, in equal equipment, not backing up his teammate by being up there on the second spot of the podium. That is the race that he has to run. And you can bet your bottom dollar that this entire break off has been him focusing on fitness, psychological approach, and I'm sure talking with his team to say, how do I do it? So Christian Horner and the team are giving him support, but they're acknowledging he is having a rough ride of it. So I'll be interested to see how that comes along this weekend. Of course, this time last year, Ferrari had that really big advantage. Pretty much it was Leclerc's race to win, but they had reliability issues. They had that big fire, but the pace was there. And I'm sure that coming off the back of that Canadian race, if you agree with me, let me know, because I think Ferrari is showing the pace that they really should be at this time of the year. The gap has closed and they made some good calls during the race. So I'm hoping that that'll translate to a better result there in Austria. Of course, with Red Bull just being so far ahead, there is another dynamic this weekend, and that is it's time for another sprint race format. And the sprint race format is something they introduced just a couple of years ago, which was pretty contentious. And we have two races. You have qualifying on the Saturday for the Sunday race. You have another qualifying session, Friday. You have another qualifying session on the Saturday morning, which determines the grid for the afternoon race. The race is shorter with a different point structure, but it is very important for the teams to get those extra points. The pressure, and again, something DB referenced earlier, is that you have so little time on track now. One of these, when it comes to a sprint race weekend, you have even less time to evolve and develop the car. You go straight basically into a part fermé situation, which is when you can't touch the car after qualifying. So it's a shortened distance race, about 100 kilometers, and it provides great entertainment. I'm not sure the drivers love it. I wouldn't love it, I don't think, because you run the risk of damaging your car before you have the main show on the Sunday. And how do you drive at that level holding back? The one thing you don't want to do is have an accident, damage your chassis. But as we've seen, there have been a lot of accidents in the series so far in the run-up in the championship, and it's not out of the question that you'll see someone damage their car on the Saturday, which compromises their run on the Sunday. We talk about upgrades. Well, McLaren are pretty much doing a complete upper aero improvements to their car. The floor isn't being touched, apparently, but all the top body work, all those little diffusers, wings, everything is geared. It's a new concept, and over the next 3 races, they're going to be implementing that as a total new package. If you're McLaren, you see it with Lando Norris being slightly objectively depressed at times. It sounds like, we're going to get there, but I don't know when. I think this is, they've sort of, what do you call it, bet the farm on it, and they really want to go into Austria, certainly the British Grand Prix, with the opportunity to get themselves consistently right there at the front, maybe not beating Max, but putting themselves in the position to beat Max should it come up. Mercedes, they had qualifying disasters last year with both of them crashing out. But then you had Hamilton getting himself on the podium. And that for me is the relentless brilliance of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell. But Lewis leading the team there on that side of things. Remember, 7-time world champion. The guy knows how to win races. He's just got to get himself with the car right up there to challenge in case of a mishap. But another podium would certainly be the way to go. So pressure on drivers increasing. Let's watch on Perez. Let's watch on Stroll, see how they do. Will Alonso manage to pull off yet another podium? It's outstanding. He hasn't not scored points this season. So it's really heading in the right direction. It's going to be a great race. 2 races. Don't forget to follow along. And I really urge you, obviously alongside this podcast, listen in on some of the official Formula One podcasts, because they're there on site. They have so much insight, and they'll make the weekend come alive for you. But we are here at the Wynn Las Vegas, and every time I walk in the lobby and I see that beautiful Formula One car, I see the McLarens in the showroom next to me, you get the feeling that Las Vegas is in its pre-roll for what's going to happen here in November. And it really is all about the Wynn as the epicenter for Formula One during that week. As I said, we start with the Concours d'Elegance on the Saturday before, and then as the week, ribbon cutting on the Wednesday night, And then the Formula One weekend will kick off. No one has seen the track yet unless you play one of the simulator games. So it's equal playing field for everybody. But how do you get involved? Well, for the Heineken Silver Grand Prix of Las Vegas, go to I'll say it correctly here. It is the winlasvegas.com/experiences/F1. And you can find all the ways to get here to watch the race. Something for everyone. You have the Grandstand package, the Paddock Club package. You have the Wynn Grid Club. And if you're one of the lucky elite, you could join the $1 million package, which would probably put you in the best seat of the house, but not inside a Formula 1. Unless you manage to jump in the one in the lobby. So much to look forward to. That track is coming together. When I walked out last night to walk across the strip to go for dinner, I looked and I thought, they are going to be doing 200 miles an hour right where I'm standing. It is breathtaking. I hope to see you here, obviously, and I hope to see you on this show next week when we get to recap what happened in Austria and preview the British Grand Prix. Thanks for watching, everyone. Drive to Win and enjoy the race.